Good morning, everybody. Welcome to the second lecture of the Module 3, Unit 1, concerning relationship between culture, health, and healthcare. Our general question today will be, why is culture important in healthcare? And the main assumption here will be that when healthcare providers and system are able to provide a positive and safe environment of cultural competence that meets the cultural, religious and spiritual needs of those receiving care, then outcomes for patients improve and the healthcare system as a whole becomes a more positive environment. Of course, in order to develop this topic, we need to get to definitions of the general concepts here, such as culture. But even before that, it's good just to have a glimpse on the question of intercultural education. So it's something that, in fact, we are developing here. So intercultural education would stand for starting with looking at one's own culture and identity. So it means that if we want to study impact of culture, we need to reflexively understand our own culture and hence our own identity, or differently speaking, cultural identity. Of course, there is many definitions of culture. Here we have picked one of them just to our minds will navigate us successfully through the content of this lecture. So for the sake of this lecture, let's define culture as a dynamic system of rules, overt and covert, established by groups and designed to ensure their survival, concerning values, beliefs, norms and behaviors shared by the group, but recognized to varying degrees by individuals within the group. The culture is also transmitted from generation to generation, so it's relatively permanent, but it's also likely to change over time. So having this very broad definition of culture, we can proceed to develop culturally sensitive approach, which is important, to scrutinize the topic today. So when dealing with a foreigner, we tend to perceive situations through the prism of our norms and values. This is how it happens. Yeah, it's a good example. So we see our own cultural perspective through our own glasses, and we also interpret and evaluate events, other people and their behaviors in relation to our cultural standards. Yeah. But we need to develop the ability to observe from a meta level. And this skill is particularly important for nurses providing assistance to people from different cultures. It's also good to think about culture as a kind of invisible cloak. Yeah, this metaphor, which I like, is helpful because it stresses that everyone is both a creator and a recipient of a culture, and it carries it with them everywhere even without knowing it. So just like a part of our dress, we have it all the time with us. But when we make intercultural contact, we bring with us our entire cultural background, norms, values and behaviors. So as a result, we expect the other persons to know and respect our norms and values, and sometimes it may bring some misunderstandings which we have to understand. There is also another very good metaphor of culture, a culture of an iceberg. You see a picture of an iceberg here. So there you see that there is a part over the water and under the water. So the part over the water represents what is visible, what visible elements, visible elements, such as everyone can connect to culture such as music, dress, manner of speaking, perhaps facial expressions, cuisine. So we see that culturally people differ in this overwater elements. But of course, there are also underwater, invisible, unconscious elements of culture, which, as you see from this picture, this is why this metaphor is so important, is like the most part of the iceberg. So the most part of the culture is something that is invisible, unconscious. Yeah, and this is what we have to apprehend. So what is it? Is like, for instance, a sense of time, relationship with superiors, a sense of beauty, concept of modesty, concept of beauty, concept and experience of love, madness, peace, harmony, attitude, patterns, norms and values, etc., etc. So there's like many things that we are not aware of, but we follow them, we structure our understanding, our everyday life and relations with other. Finishing this short introduction to the theory of culture, is good to distinguish between two types of cultures, like traditional and non-traditional cultures. So then you see that they differ in many respects. What is important is that what I would take out of this is just like traditional. This is like, strictly speaking, they are just rural cultures, while modern cultures, these are like this urban cultures. And depending on this culture, different elements of our getting together, of our social behaviors, they differ. For instance, for the representatives of modern cultures, what matters most this is an individual and this individualistic approach. On contrary, for representatives of a traditional culture, what is important, this is group. It's following traditions, following some social and cultural patterns, and not to invent their own ways of being, their own lives. So taking into apart how much cultures differ, we can think about cross-cultural communication as a building bridge. Yeah, a bridge is another symbol, another metaphor. We know it takes a fort, to communicate across culture. Also because communication, let's focus upon this one for a second. Communication is not only what we are speaking, it's not only what I am speaking to you, but communication is also how do I look out, like what is like the scene, the background of my lecture. So my facial expression, interpersonal space, teaching behavior, gaze and visual attention, everything counts in terms of communication, and it all may differ in different cultures. So this is why intercultural communication is something that you have to develop. It's not something given. It's also important to bear in mind that cultural difference, they are not only structural, but that is something that we encounter in daily life, in everyday life. So then we see that cultural differences, they has to do with activities, they has to do with patterns, they have to do with lifestyles, etc., etc. If we want to improve communication skills, we need to not only study our own culture, but we need to also actively approach other cultures, and this we can accomplish it also by watching movies, reading books, participating in courses, etc., etc. But what is like entrance attitude to intercultural communication is that you have to be flexible, you have to be open, or you have to be empathetic towards others, but also critical towards your own culture and other culture. Milton Bennett stresses that in order to develop cultural sensitivity, we need to move from ethnocentrism to ethnorelativism. Yeah, ethnorelativism gives us, a more effective approach towards intercultural communication. And so, ethnocentrism in intercultural communication stands for denial, defense, and minimalization of the importance of others' culture. This is developed here. While in comparison, ethno-relativism is an approach, is an attitude, in fact, that composes of acceptance, adaptation, and integration. Yeah? So then, an individual that follows ethno-relativism attitude develops new strategies to understand others, does not see differences as a threat, but as a challenge, as a value. Yeah? He or she recognizes and tries to understand other cultures according to their own values and categories, and do not project his or her categories from his or her culture. Now, he or she also suspends judgment of other culture according to the criteria of one's own culture, and does not give up his own model of culture. This is very important, but gets to know other cultures without prejudice and stereotypes. So it doesn't mean that we need to, get rid of our culture. It means just to integrate, to adapt, to to be open and flexible, and not to erase one's own cultural identity. So, summing up, we see that culture matters in many respects, in many levels, in many aspects. So, in aspects of lifestyle behavior, diet, exercise, activity level, healthcare related behavior such as smoking, alcohol consumption, but also emotion, stress, coping, with some challenging situations. It's also present. It has impact on our attitudes, belief, how we define health, how we define death, how we perceive our own bodies, etc., etc. It means that if culture is so broad that the healthcare system and the healthcare practitioners, professionals, they also should be aware of the importance of culture on this many respects in order to provide effective care. So, last but least, there is like a huge cultural dimension of health. Yeah, and we need to remember about this. Of course, we'll develop it in details during the next lecture, lecture number 3. We will focus on religion and see that not only culture but also religion affects the said aspects. Thank you for listening to me.